tiny people, then we play with them. Woo, woo. We paint tiny people, then we play with them.
Hello and welcome to a Miniatures Monthly podcast special.
Ooh. That's the sound
Of Nagash.
in the realm of death.
The spooky god. In the realm of light. In a place suspended between the realm of also darkness and also death and also light. Is the city of Shadespire, Tom.
The city of Shadespire has arrived and it's full of twats.
And that's why we don't write the flavor
Want
text.
to kill
that's in
everyone.
this.
There is a detailed lore behind it, which is actually quite interesting. It has some interesting connotations, especially for the Stormcast, I would say.
We should talk about that, but briefly we should explain what we're doing.
Yes, that's a good point.
Hello everybody, we're going to do a one-off, probably about 1 hour-ish podcast special this month. So for the first time you're getting 2 Miniatures Monthlies in a month.
We'll still do the other 3 in a bit hour.
Oh yeah,
probably.
that's happening
Don't
next
worry,
week.
that is still coming.
But because today is the release day for Shadespire, the kind of standalone skirmish game, set in the same setting as the Age of Sigmar, which we have alluded to already, that came out today, as of the time we're recording this, and hopefully is the time I'm going to get this up, so I'm hoping to turn this around very quickly. That came out today. We went to Games Workshop this morning to pick it up. We have played 2 games now, and so we thought we would share some thoughts and actually talk about this game sort of a night session, partly so that it doesn't take up like a good half of this month's regular minis pod.
Indeed.
But also, because I think it warrants it, because this is, I've been really excited, I don't know about you, Tom, but as Shadespire has drawn closer, I've gotten more excited for it in the manner of, in a way I usually associate with being excited for a new game, like a video game, right? Like it's had that kind of, oh, that's coming this week, that's exciting, like,
Yeah.
getting, work done yesterday so that I knew I had today properly free to enjoy it. It's been a thing.
Yeah, I've certainly been getting excited about it as well, particularly because I think they've done a good job of teasing a lot of the factions still to come. So the initial box comes with 2 fully formed warbands, decks for each of them, but also enough cards to start deck building if you want to.
Yeah.
Which is a really nice package. Like often you don't get to do like very in-depth deck building with starter packs in this sort of game necessarily. But it seems like there are some interesting options there.
Yeah, it's a very full-featured starter pack, I would say.
Yeah, I don't feel like I'm going to be required to go out and buy extra stuff to actually unlock the potential of the warbands or to unlock different ways of playing with those warbands.
Yeah, I'm really interested in talking about, it feels like we have a big subject to attack in this game, and it's interesting to figure out what angle we should approach it from. Because that in and of itself is a very interesting thing, that if you maybe one way to approach it is kind of what this means for GW. So this is a very different kind of game to the ones they've produced before. It's a skirmish game, but it's not analogous to something like Shadow War or Necromunda or Mordheim, in that it is not a campaign game and it doesn't really use any of the rules of, you know how like, Shadow War is a sort of boiled down version of 40k, right?
Yeah.
This is not a boiled down version of Age of Sigmar. That's skirmish. Skirmish exists. That's what that's for, even though the model count is similar.
Indeed.
This is actually probably reminds me more of Blood Bowl, actually, in some ways. Like, it's a competitive combat and deck building game, more like a board game, that happens to use those characters. But it's designed for competitive play, and it's priced and kind of positioned, I would say, directly opposite X-Wing.
Right.
I don't know if you would agree with that assertion, or even things like HeroClix.
Yeah, I'd say that it's more complete as a starting package than X-Wing was.
Definitely.
Because as I've said before, that, X-Wing leaves you with loads of hooks, like to go and buy other stuff to get the good cards to actually start filling out the starter sets. Whereas this feels like, as a box, very complete. Like, as though you're going to get a lot of play out of it.
Yeah. Maybe that's a place to start with what's in the box. So, it's a £40 box, which is actually pretty good, I think, by both board game standards and GW standards.
Yeah.
And that contains, obviously, the rules for the game, 2 double-sided, playboard tiles, which we'll get to, I suppose, and 2 warbands. You have 3 Stormcast Eternals, and 5 Khorne Blood Reavers. And you get obviously the dice and tokens and things that you need, but you also get, So fully built, decks for each of those factions. We can get into what exactly that means, I guess, when we talk about the rules, but like, those are two, we've played with those twice now, and those are full, but they're not like starter versions. Like sometimes you get a competitive game and it's like, oh, if you play this competitively, a full deck will be 30 cards, but here's the 20 cards to start with. Star Wars Destiny works that way.
Sure.
Those are both fully constructed army decks, basically, that work, as far as we can tell, pretty well. You also get a deck of about the same amount of cards again, of optional cards to do deck building, and that includes new specific cards for both the Stormcast and the Khorne Bloodbound, as well as a big set of neutral additional cards that introduce other mechanics. So it's interesting. Like, if you compare that offering to the X-Wing starter set, which is cheaper at 25 quid, but the X-Wing starter set gives you enough to play a game that is about 60% of the points value. And not even that. Right. Probably less than half. No, wait, what am I talking about? I just remembered what's in the X-Wing core set. The X-Wing core set gives you enough to play a game that's between a third and 40% of the points value of what would be considered a competitive X-Wing game.
Right.
So you're looking at you'd be looking at 3 core sets at least to play a full 100-point game of X-Wing, or probably an equivalent investment in other expansions.
Yeah.
It depends what you buy. But
sure.
You'd at least get close to the sort of Shadespire thing, and you wouldn't have a lot of flexibility in terms of moving pieces around within that set of initial pieces.
Yeah.
But I imagine we've both seen that, like, actually it seems like quite a lot of scope for changing things.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, first of all, the two included factions do play and behave very differently, and we'll get into precisely how when we get into the rules stuff, particularly with objective cards and the way they, like, how themey they are and how differently the way that Shadespire works is that different factions have different ways of cashing in points almost in every round, and that incentivizes them to play in a certain, either aggressively or defensively, depending on how you build your deck, which is a really cool thing. And all of that is in place already from what we've seen in the starter set. Like, all of that is in the default decks, and there are interesting options in the extra cards to let you adjust that and actually change the way your
it's almost it's like the default deck is sort of doesn't require you to go in with a particular strategy in mind, which is appropriate for like my first game kind of type builds. And then the optional cards the core set provides are all about allowing you to say, I want to configure my warband slightly more aggressively, or I want to configure it slightly more defensively, or I want to do something weird. I don't know if there's obviously subsequent expansions will provide more scope for that kind of thing, but I would have, and this maybe the value of the box is not the most exciting thing to open with, but I was impressed. Like, I think I would have been impressed with the box had it not had that additional deck of and now deck building stuff in it. If it was just the 2 army decks and that was it, I think it would have been fine. But the fact that that's in there and not an additional purchase or something is actually really kind of cool, because
it is really cool. I think they've, it's a really good decision because they're about to go straight into competitive tournaments, Games Workshop run competitive tournaments. And if everyone's just coming into it with the starter set and the starter set had no flexibility, then it's going to be perhaps quite a dull tournament. So giving people who've just bought the starter set the scope to compete as much as anyone else is a really nice move.
Yes, absolutely. But even then, you say that, but we just played 2 very different games using only the default decks.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables to it. So you've got your warband, and your warband is consistent. You've always got the same number of characters and always the same.
Yeah, that's super interesting to me.
Yeah,
we should begin it. It's really weird to figure out where we should. I was thinking, do we start with the lore? But let's go with, I guess, the game, because that's right. So go on. Your warband is always the same group of characters.
Yeah, which is interesting because if I was going to sort of try and second guess Games Workshop, I would imagine that they would want you to be buying models, right?
Yeah.
But you buy your warband and you just get the models, and that's the dude you have. And they've got cards, and those cards have different states. So you flip them over to when they become inspired, and it changes their stats. But it's all in place. Your warband is just the most static part of the entire package.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I can't think of another miniatures war game where what models you bring with you is not, at least in some way, player determined, right? It's not like Stormcast is a faction and then you pick which Stormcast characters you want.
Yeah.
We'll get to this when we talk about the other factions, and so there will probably be 2 Stormcast warbands eventually, but those are each specific warbands. You can't mix and match characters between them, right?
Yeah.
Your Stormcast are Severin Steelheart, Angarad Brightshield, and Oberyn the Hammer Man.
Man with big hammer. Yeah, and that's always going to be the case for that warband. And if you want to buy a different warband, you get that as a package. And that means that you're not doing like list building per se, and you're not dealing with like points or that sort of balance. It feels far more like self-determining to me to build a deck that then dictates what you can do with those characters.
Yeah. So you have you're right. You have your warband, and that comes, and then there is a card for each character that has their stats on it and some special rules and that kind of thing. I won't go into every single nuance of it. And then every card is double-sided, and on the back of the card is its gold half, where that's when the character is inspired. And every character in the game has a different condition that causes them to become inspired. And inspired is basically better. It unlocks sometimes different abilities, sometimes just better stats. It's different from character to character. Even in the starter set, though, there's some indication of the kind of room for interesting design that creates. So each of my Bloodbound, inevitably, we should point out, you're playing the Stormcast.
Oh, yes.
And I've been playing Chaos.
I don't think we even had the discussion. It was just what was happening.
It's like, yeah, just assembling the gribbly red men.
Yeah.
We should talk about assembly as well. Anyway, and inspiration itself is an interesting mechanic. So, my Bloodbound go from being, they're not great, there's lots of them, but they, all become inspired at the same time because they all have the same, inspiration trigger, basically, which is when, 3 characters are out of action, i.e. dead, the Bloodbound are inspired. The Bloodborne are inspired, which is a very different thing. And what that means is, so this is sort of like Shadespire Tactics 101. Because my characters are weaker, ideally, I want to trade my 2 weakest characters at the start of the game for 1 good Stormcast. Because all the Stormcast are good.
Yeah.
And what that means is then 3 people are dead, and then all my good Bloodbound become inspired. A bad result for me strategically early in the game is you kill 3 of my good guys,
right,
and none on your side is dead, and my 2 remaining chumps are both then feeling pretty good. And that's very Khorne, right? Like the notion that, a lot of the Khorne objectives are themed around the idea that Khorne doesn't care from whence the blood flows, that as long as people are dying on the battlefield, Khorne is happy. But strategically, there are ways you can try and massage exactly the way in which the blood flows, to your advantage. And that is one mechanic. That is a single mechanic. Explain how the Stormcast work.
It's very different for the Stormcast. So the Bloodborne, as you described, they inspire one kind of heroic moment where
they all become mental.
They all become mental. They all go faster and they're all better. For the Stormcast, they're much more individualistic in that they get inspired if they save an attack, if they take it on the shield. So if you successfully roll a defensive roll, basically, and you deflect an attack, that particular Stormcast becomes inspired. Basically, they're filled with Sigmar's vengeance, and then suddenly they're much better at, striking back, and then they'll have more capacity to damage, that sort of thing. But that means that for Chris, there's an interesting decision to make about attacking any Stormcast, because if you just attack a Stormcast with a chump and you're not going to do any damage, there's a chance that you'll do nothing but anger them.
Yeah, exactly.
And do you want to anger all of them? No, you want to preferably gang up on them and hit them individually, take one down before the others without inspiring the others at all.
Yeah.
And that's already a very interesting kind of, way to play the game.
And for you, I guess you want to encourage a situation where people are forced to split damage between your characters, because you want to be taking a lot of smaller shitter attacks on everybody.
Yeah.
Rather than one massive combo on one person.
And Stormcast do very well when they make the shield wall as well. So there are interesting kind of character upgrades. Upgrades is a thing that you can apply. We'll talk about the card phase. That's really interesting. But you can apply upgrades like in the middle of a phase, in the middle of the battle. Like you can give someone the ability to create a shield wall where she'll inspire people adjacent to her to become on guard, which, essentially means that they're very hard to kill, very hard to hurt. So you get this mentality with the Stormcast where they want to kind of lock shields, lock up, get close together and force the enemy to attack multiple Stormcasts at the same time to deal with them as a unit. But it's also a very mobile game with very interesting kind of terrain aspects to it, as we'll get into.
So we've explained inspiration. This is one mechanic.
Yes.
So you also the place where your kind of creativity is expressed, and but as we say, we've been playing with the default decks, is through deck construction. So every player has 2 decks of cards. You have a deck of objectives and a deck of what are called power cards. And you have a deck of 12 objectives and a deck of 20 power cards. And in neither game did we fully draw either of them, although there are ways in which that could happen, I suppose. And the game is very quick as well. You play 3 rounds, each with 4 activations per player. So you do 12 things, really, with the exception of sort of reactions and some sort of like free actions and that kind of thing that can happen. And our first game where we didn't understand the rules, or we were learning as we went, took close to an hour, like 45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah.
Our second game where we did understand the rules and we both had a plan was 20 minutes, which I think is much closer to the average for the game, which was really interesting, wasn't it?
It was really pacey. And you can see the moments where we both have to slow down and start thinking about things. And this is one of the things that I was most excited about, was that it's a game about dice, it's a game about drawing cards, but it never felt dicey to me. It never felt like the variance didn't seem mad. Yeah. It always seems like you've always got a lot of control over the odds in any given encounter.
Which is something that, and I'll probably talk about this on the Miniatures Monthly proper, but it's something that I used to love about X-Wing. And it's probably the thing that default Shadespire captures the most. And I want to kind of unpick some of those mechanics and why that's the case. But it doesn't feel very dice swingy. And there's a lot you can do strategically in terms of understandable face-up card-based transparent mechanics to give yourself better chances of succeeding when you want to do that. And we got to a position, I think, in our second game. We're not going to do blow, blow, blows for the game because, again, it's so quick. It's, it's not worth doing that. But we got to a point in the second game where we are both appreciating the cleverness of each other's positioning decisions rather than simply, oh, that was a good dice roll.
Yeah.
So, we should probably explain dice. So unlike, Warhammer, it doesn't use D6 traditional dice. It uses D6, but they have special symbols on them, which is very similar to a Fantasy Flight game. Broadly speaking, you have attack dice and defense dice, and there are there are 2 different symbols for attack and 2 different symbols for defense, and different types of characters use different ones. Broadly speaking, though, there's a good attack symbol, which is hammers, and a bad attack symbol, which is crossed swords, and a good defense symbol, which is shields, and a bad defense symbol, which is evades. So if your character relies on evades, you're less likely to get that result. If your character relies on hammers, you're more likely to get that result. So all of the Stormcast characters are looking for hammers on their dice rolls, and they're more likely to get them. Most of the Khorne characters are looking for crossed swords, and they're less likely to get them. And that is a way that variance is controlled within the dice roll.
Yeah.
The dice also have 2 different assist symbols on them, however. One which is sort of half an assist and one which is a full assist. And when you attack somebody, depending on how many of your other characters are in an adjacent hex to the person you're attacking, you can count one or both of those assist symbols as successes, right? Like that's kind of as simple as that.
Yeah.
It's not about forming a line necessarily. It's about adjacency to the target.
Right.
Or when you're defending, the amount of, it's still the amount of people you've got surrounding somebody. So if you're completely surrounded, it's hard for you to attack somebody because they, on their defensive roll, are still going to get assists from everybody else.
Yeah.
And that's, is one of the reasons the Stormcast wall is so effective. But because the Bloodbound, I'm going to keep saying that, have numbers, it also means that those crappy Bloodbound, god damn it. Those crappy Bloodbound characters. The crappy Reavers, the chumps, as we've been calling them, are also useful for granting that bonus to other people. But that by itself means that your dice odds are very much based on positioning decisions that you've made and things you've set up. And those choices go all the way back to the beginning of the game, right? Like, so if you, and that ties into lots of other cool mechanics. Like, if you perform a successful attack action against somebody, you can push them a square, which reminds me a bit of Blood Bowl. And if you push them, you can, maybe it's best to use examples. If you push someone, you can push them away from their allies so that they no longer get an, offensive bonus. So maybe that's a good use, but that has to hit, right? But there's this game of sort of hex-based positioning in order to try and maximize your own dice benefits and minimize your opponent's dice benefits. And that would be pretty interesting strategically without the card layer, which we should get to.
Yeah, there's a lot of systems going on.
Yeah.
The ability to push each other around is really, really important because you've got a limited number of actions available to you. Whenever you've got 4 activations per turn. And each activation, you get to select one of your characters and do something with them.
Yeah.
You can move them. and you can move them into range of combat, but they can't attack. So the move in and of itself is
the activation.
Yeah. Is the activation. But if you charge, you can move and strike, but they don't get to move or attack for the rest of the turn. That's their last involvement in the phase. And the intention between those two things is really interesting, because if you make a move action into an enemy and then that ends your activation, then your enemy can attack back and knock you away, at which point you've already moved. So you're out of combat then. You're kind of like been pushed back into no man's land, you know. So this is the sort of thing you have to really think about, like where is your opponent going to move you once you've moved into position? And the charge at least gets you that guaranteed attack, is a really effective way of repositioning if you're already in combat. If you're in base to base, you can use the charge to, you know, go and attack from a different angle, which is interesting. So the kind of, also you can use the push moves to move people off objectives, which is very important. So you stand on objectives, and if you remain standing on an objective at the end of the turn, you score it. And both players.
Well, we should get to how that works, but yes.
Yes. And also the players have a say in where the objectives go at the start of the game during the setup phase.
Yeah.
So it's very, very much a game about positioning, and it's a game about movement ranges and being within a certain number of hexes, and always understanding kind of where your dudes could end up in a turn's time, you know, a couple of activations.
Yeah, and there's interesting considerations, like, so with your Stormcast, where you have 3 quite elite characters that are very good, you plan around the fact that you have 3 characters and 4 activations. So one of them is not going to want to do the thing like a charge that shuts them down for the rest of the phase. You really want someone who can just stand and fight. Like if someone is stood in combat for the entire thing, you can activate that character 4 times and just attack 4 times as long as they survive. However, with the Bloodbound, and I imagine with 5 characters, or with the Death Army that's coming that has 7.
Yeah.
You still only have 4 activations. So the Bloodbound can only ever activate 4 of their characters a turn. One guy has got to not do something. And so sometimes you're just going to activate your elite guys over and over again. Sometimes you're going to be trying to get everybody forwards and you've got to leave someone behind. And so that distinction becomes really interesting. So even though you're not, choosing which specific people you're taking, there's a lot of character just in how the warbands work. But now that I've played it, I can see what they're going for with some of the other warbands as well. Like the fact that the Orc warband that's coming has 4 characters is interesting, because that's like quite efficient. They can all charge every turn.
Yeah.
Which is very Orc, but also it's designed that way, right? Like, you know, there's no guy at the back shouting orders, but not moving himself. There's, you know, I can already, it's tickling the, like, oh, that's clever kind of part of my brain already just with that.
I can already see, the Sepulchral Guard, who are the upcoming Death faction. You're right in that you only get 4 activations, so you only get 4 of them, but you can hide movement abilities in the power cards that you play after each activation.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that's how they will work, where, you know, that you'll do an action, and after every activation, once you've activated someone, you then have like a card phase where, each person takes it in turn to play any relevant power cards they want to play.
From their hand, we should stress. So you have a deck of 20 and you have a hand of 5 at any given time. So the game is designed to be quick, right? You have 4 hands basically in the total deck. But, yes. So you're holding a hand of power cards, which are divided between upgrades, which you need to spend victory points, which maybe don't need to explain too much about, but like, you have to earn points in order to spend points to upgrade your characters in the middle of battle. And every character can only ever have 1 upgrade, so you have to pick it carefully based on what's in your hand.
Yep.
You also have ploys, which are either played at the phase that you're about to explain, which I'll let you explain, but also, or can be like reactions. Like, you've done a thing, I'll do a thing.
Yeah.
And this is where a lot of the interesting rule breaking happens.
Yes. A lot of kind of the quirkiest stuff. So one of these power cards, for example, can just swap 2 fighters around if they're adjacent. And it could be one of my fighters, one of your fighters, Chris, or it could be 2 of your fighters, whatever you want to do. And at this point, you're kind of, and occasionally there are the one that I used really usefully to just move an enemy 1 hex. And that ability, like, it can be crucial. If you want to push someone off an objective, you want to push someone into combat with you or out of combat with someone important, that one ability to, you know, just to slightly misalign the enemy is actually really vital.
Or for example, in the second game we played, where I was looking to kill your general for various reasons that we should get to when we talk about objective decks. But I charged him with a chump, who I didn't expect to survive your side, but I knew that because there's a card phase between every activation for both players, so there's a lot of card phases.
Yeah.
I could charge him, do my attack, inevitably do no damage because he's only a chump, and then play Confusion to swap him
Yes.
to swap my guy with your guy, which means that we had this weird, because you know, in that situation, you had a classic kind of Stormcast shield wall, and my shitty corn man runs up to him, stabs him, does no damage, but then swaps places with him. So then my corn guy's in the shield wall, which he won't survive, but your general is then exposed, right? Like he's then not adjacent to any allies. Well, you know, in terms of the rest of my warband. So that, you know, that's an example of how that card can take what would be a dumb thing to do and turn it into a situational use of that character. That character's job is then just to grab that guy, spin him out of formation, and then get flattened.
Yeah. So you see those really interesting movement powers in those power cards. You also see, very interesting public effects that will last an activation. And so you put down an effect like, that both players can see, and it'll be like, oh, this character will have +1 to his damage rolls for the next phase. Or, in the good corn one is like, it's raining blood now. So
hallelujah.
Everybody's going to be, so the Stormcasters that are normally looking for hammers on those attack rolls, the next combat activation, they're going to be looking for those crossed swords, which is less likely.
Yeah.
So, you can
basically half the odds of an average Stormcast making a hit for a turn.
Yeah.
By making it rain blood for one turn. But you have to, again, that's a very careful decision. You have to think about what your opponent's going to do and etc.
Absolutely. And there's a really good one where the corn player can play it, and it means that the next amount, whatever damage is done in the next activation by it. So my general could charge in and do 3 damage with his greatsword. That's always minimized
Which
to 1.
is enough to kill all but one of the corn characters in one hit.
That's right. But you put that card down during one of those phases and you say, okay, in the next turn, whoever does that damage is actually damage 1. It doesn't matter.
It means that the next the specific wording is the next instance of damage dealt to one of your characters is 1 point, regardless of what the damage value would be. So, which is very powerful.
Which is really, really good, really good. And then as soon as that goes down, it's kind of, face up on the board, that changes all, like loads of my decisions. Like I have to rethink what I'm going to do. You know, that happens constantly with these card faces.
I really love that about it because it means that, there are, so those sorts of things are kind of like gotcha moments. Like when we very first played it, because one of the experiences playing it for the first time is you and I don't know what's in those decks. We don't know what you can really do. I have ideas about what Stormcast is going to do, but you know, we're still learning. So when you start learning, you inevitably are surprised by some of the effects that come out. But the important thing is it's not like you do the damage and then I reveal the card that negates the damage.
Yeah, surprise.
It's before you do it. I say the next instance damage you do is only 1 damage, and then you sit and consider what your actual move is going to be. So maybe you just do a move that you were going to do anyway, but you just choose to skip your attack that turn and do something else, and you know, and then it's a much more interesting, much less negative feeling interaction because I haven't wasted my card. Because I've forced you to do something other than what you ideally wanted to do. But you also haven't been completely denied, right? You've just been given something to think about, which is far preferable, I think, for any strategy game.
And even in just the 2 games we played, like there were lots of thinking pauses, which is always a good sign. It's like you're thinking about how it's all going to play out. And, you're not, I was never concerned with gambling so much as like, I mean, obviously things I'd ideally like to happen. I charged my general into a couple of your guys and did a mighty swing and hoped to take one of them out and almost did, but didn't. But you know, I knew the risks there. Like the risks in the game become apparent very fast. I think because you're playing with so many few characters and you know what they can and can't do very quickly.
And also, you know, you took that risk with your general in a game where I killed him, but you also didn't know that I was holding an objective card that was telling me kill him.
Right.
So you definitely would have taken that risk if you'd known that my objective was to kill your general. But it didn't end the game that you didn't have that. But like, that's an interesting play. We should talk about objective cards separately, I suppose. But, that side of it is really interesting. The other thing that's really important is that damage values are flat. So when you attack, you roll a certain number of attack dice and a certain number of defense dice. And what determines whether or not the attack is successful is whoever gets more successes. And you're looking for different symbols. We're talking about a lot of rules and maybe we're at risk of making it sound complicated, but it really isn't actually. Like, it's very quick.
It is.
You know, it's very self-explanatory when it's in front of you. Whoever gets more successes is successful. If the defender is successful, they take no damage. If they are unsuccessful in defending, they take the amount of damage printed on the attack profile. There are situations, so certain inspired characters can start to benefit from like the critical hit symbol on the dice. But even though that symbol is there, it doesn't do anything other than provide an extra attack, an extra success. unless the specific character or upgrade happens to upgrade it in some way. And so there's none of that thing that can happen in both traditional Warhammer, but also in X-Wing, where the amount of damage you do is to some extent left up to a dice roll.
Right.
Where sometimes, so when you're staring at a situation in Shadespire, one thing I really like about it, particularly from a feel point of view, is if you can be killed or not.
Right.
From a particular position.
That's definitely correct, yeah.
Right. So, all of the Stormcast characters have 4 health. And only, two of the Khorne characters do 1 damage, 2 of them do 2 damage, and 1 of them does 3 damage. So no Khorne character by themselves, without an upgrade or without an inspired state, can ever one-shot a Stormcast.
Right.
It just cannot, mathematically, it cannot happen. However, there are, for example, a combination of cards. So if you have the guy who does 3 damage and a guy who does 1 damage standing next to a Stormcast, and the Stormcast uses their activation to kill the chump, then maybe you can reveal the card that causes the Stormcast to take 1 damage, because sometimes because the Bloodbound have a card that means that if one of your guys dies, but you have another character who's engaged with the person who kills them, you can just deal 1 damage to that character, because it's while they're busy chopping to pieces one of your dudes, the other one gets a blow in. And then that Stormcast has taken 1 automatic damage, at which point they are in 1-shot range of the guy with the big axe. But that, again, requires that attack to hit, and also that the sequence of play in which that occurs means that there's there's time to see that coming as the Stormcast, right? It's not I roll my damage dice and, oh shit, I've just got a D6 mortal wounds, that guy's dead.
Yeah.
Right? Or I've just, rolled a 6 or something, and it is, I think I've been thinking a lot lately about the way games avoid that negative feeling of I've just been surprised by something I couldn't control. And I think Shadespire has a lot of things in it that mean that you're thinking about the actual maths of the game.
Yeah.
And not, sometimes you can be surprised, but it's not, in those 2 games we've played, we've not had that kind of moment of I guess I'm dead. Whenever I lost a guy, you lost a guy, we both knew that was a very evident possibility.
Yeah, for sure. And that, the guy who does 3 damage to Stormcast, he's a dude with an enormous axe. He's the only one on the Bloodbound, squad that has that, and it's very obvious where he is at any given point. So if he's in contact with my general, I better be sure that that's what I want to be happening at that point with the right upgrades to make sure he's not going to cleave my guy in half.
Yeah.
And that's what it always felt like to me. If I lost someone, I was always responsible partly in some way. Even if you played really well and set up a good screen with your chumps that stopped me from getting in, it felt more like I was playing you rather than the dice. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the dice are there for a reason, and sometimes stuff just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And I think the dice are important because they allow you, because you should be trying to set up the odds in your favor with the movement system, which is exactly that's one of the things that's core to the X-Wing rules as well, is that dice are average if you, but if you really work at getting, well, it used to be this way, if you really work at getting an advantageous situation, that's when you get to punch the damage through, and that's when it's really gratifying. The other thing that I really like about Shadespire's core rules, just in terms of combat, is that, and I haven't seen another game do this quite as well, it should be kind of implicit by now, I really like these core rules, is that characters tend to get more dangerous as the game goes on. Health is a thing, and they can be 1 hit from dead, but a character that clings on to life, and maybe gets an upgrade, and maybe gets into their inspired state, is actually really dangerous towards the end game. So you don't end up with the traditional thing where your armies are very powerful at the beginning of the game and crash against each other, and then you try and wrestle a victory out with the bloodied remnants of what survives, which is its own drama. I think that works in a big game of Warhammer. I think that's fine. What you get is a big clash that resolves into a much dicier game of strategy between bloodied but much more lethal people. I think that's been the case in both of the games we played. Yeah,
definitely. So, for example, one of the upgrades I was able to put on Severin Steelheart, the leader of the Stormcast Eternals, in this game, he got a lightning sword, where his sword became wreathed in lightning, which gave him a ranged attack. And that sort of changed the final round of the game massively in terms of what both of us were trying to get done. Because I know, Chris, you are keen to make sure you're outside of that range, because that lightning sword, that ranged attack can one-shot a crappy Bloodborne.
Yeah, it really can.
Bloodbound soldier.
Crappy Bloodborne. They're the corn Bloodborne now. We can't get around that.
Yeah, sorry about this. But yeah, and just that one upgrade, even though he was wounded, upgrading characters is super important in that game. And there are some of the upgrades that the Stormcast have that I still don't quite understand why they're good yet. But the ones that I've used definitely changed their capabilities and suddenly turned them into something else on the battlefield, which is a really cool little mini arc for a 20-minute 3-phase game to have. You know, that your 3 characters can suddenly start doing different things and, you know, attacking the field in a different way by the end of the game that they would at the start.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool for a short board game.
Like some of the upgrades are generic, we should stress. So some of them are just like +1 wound, +1 damage, that kind of thing. And some of them are character specific. And that is interesting because obviously it means that you can draw an upgrade for a character who is dead, which has happened to me in every game, both the games we played, where you're going to want to discard that during the end phase and pull something else. However, like all of the Bloodbound chumps have really good individual upgrades. So if you get to the point where you've got 1 chump left, but they're inspired because inevitably if the rest of your army is dead, even if you haven't killed anything else, they will be inspired because that's the condition for them. Also, if you've managed to draw and apply their their character specific upgrade, and to stress, a character can only ever have 1 upgrade. So you will have had to not given them something else. Then they do become quite dangerous. So you can then maybe try and eke a victory back. Although we haven't really been in that situation, but like it's there in the rules for
definitely.
that to happen.
Yeah.
To finish up talking about the rules though, there's two things we haven't talked about yet. They're both really important. One is the boards themselves. So you, basically you roll off at the beginning of the game and you pick a board, which is this big folding hex board. And based on whoever wins the roll off, you take it in turns to place a board. And you, so as the Bloodbound, I was trying to create big open fields where I could set up flanking attacks. So I would pick one that had no obstacles on it, just a complete open board of hexes, and place it sort of, long ways, so that it's, you're going to be encouraged to attach it to the widest edge, but, it doesn't have to work that way. Then the other player, whoever wins the roll off, takes their board and attaches it to the other board in any way they like, as long as 3 complete hexes are formed between the 2 where the boards meet. And what that means is that even though it's just 2 boards attached to each other to form the battlefield, there are actually like quite a lot of different ways they can be connected. In our first game, we had a completely open field, a square basically. In the second, we had a corridor. Well, so we had 2 arenas linked by a narrow passage.
Yeah, with a little bit of terrain. So there are like impassable hexes on some of them, and that formed a kind of more of a choke point in the second game.
And so that itself is an interesting set of decisions, and that affected things in both games that, that is it's not so much that we're really thinking about it hugely at the moment, but it's like, that's an element of the skill ceiling that is there. Yeah. Secondly, you have a pile of objective tokens that are hex shaped themselves, and players take it in turns to place them blind, so face down, on the board. And then you flip them over and each of them has a number. And the number just indicates which objective it is. And then this interacts with your objective deck, because one of the game's sort of basic objective card is something like capture objective 2. And if you happen to draw that card and objective 2 happens to be in your territory, it's easy. If it happens to be in the enemy territory, it's hard. It just creates a kind of flexible, a condition from which to get 1 victory point that you might spend on an upgrade or something like that.
Yeah.
But then there are also, you have a deck of 12 of these and you have 3 at a time, and they can be everything from capture this specific territory to big game ending things like score this if the entire opposing warband is dead, through to much more kind of specific things. And each of you is holding 3 of these at any given time. You don't know what your opponent is holding. And this encourages you to set up interesting scenarios. Like maybe I'm holding the one that means that I can score this at the very end of the game if all of my surviving characters are in your territory, which is interesting because then I have to have someone survive and they have to be in your territory. And I can be trying to set that up while you're trying to set up something completely different. And it feels like the construction of the choices you make for your objective deck are easily as important as the choices you make for your power deck, because the 2 have to work together.
Yeah.
In those optional cards we were talking about, there's room to create both aggressive and defensive versions of a Stormcast deck. Yeah. And similar for Blood, there's no defensive Bloodbound kind of style, but there are different takes on it. But it's interesting, and they're quite characterful as well. Like Stormcast get benefits for holding the line and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Bloodbound have a lot of things that are Khorne really doesn't care. Like, a certain amount of people have to have died, but it doesn't matter who. Like, that kind of thing. There's one crazy Khorne one, which is that if at the end of the game only one Bloodbound is left, it doesn't matter who they are. They get 6 victory points, which is insane.
Yeah.
Like, that's a huge swing.
Absolutely.
And it can only be scored at the end of the game. And the idea is that guy just becomes Khorne's champion because he's the one that survived the melee. But it means that if you're playing against a Khorne list or a Khorne deck, that's a possibility.
For sure.
So you have to either beat them by more than 6 points, kill all of them, or kill all but 2 of them. But whatever you don't do, don't leave one chump alive.
Yeah.
Because that might be what they're gunning for.
If the Khorne player's holding one guy back as though they're going to be capping objectives, in their territory, but actually they just want them out of the combat, you got to be looking out for that if you know that that's in their deck, right?
That's super exciting. Like the room for a sort of strategic layer of understanding what different decks might be trying to get out of the game, but not necessarily knowing. Having to intuit intent from someone's playstyle is really interesting, and that gets players to interact with each other, and that's really cool as well.
I think one of the reasons why it works and doesn't feel super swingy or kind of hard to pass is that most of the objectives are actually only flow 1 or 2, which isn't an insurmountable game swing necessarily. You can win with both of our
With each one, which is immediately set aside from Age of Sigmar.
But for example, an objective capture is good. It's 1 point, and you get a point by just killing a guy. You get 1 point in loads of ways, but they've done a good job of limiting the big swingy ones, just like a couple. So I can memorize a couple for each faction, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So part of me wants to kind of treasure this moment in Shadespire's life when it's in the early stages, as these games inevitably become incredibly complicated and require a huge
before the power
knowledge.
creep and the jank arrives. I completely agree.
So where it's in its kind of pure, well-tested state, and some factions that already been tested, hopefully are going to be coming in. I can memorize 1 or 2 mega objectives for each of those things that I have to look out for, which is good, because if there were loads of those things in there, like you would start to run into that bad player experience of like you playing some orcs and they do a crazy objective marker that you just didn't know about that, swung the game even though you played
At the moment, it feels like as long as you take the time to kind of go through the cards, and there aren't huge numbers of them, because again, you're talking about a deck of 12 and a deck of 20. It's not a million cards.
Yeah.
And a lot of them fit into types, right? Like there are objectives for having all of your dudes in your enemy territory. There are objectives to having all your dudes in your own territory. And you can probably feel out, once you know that exists as a principle, you can feel out what your opponent wants. Yeah. Right? Like, well, he seems to be hanging back. Maybe he's holding that objective. Like that's the thing. But like, yeah, you're right. Like the fact that what the nuts Khorne turning defeat into victory thing looks like.
For sure.
You have that feeling that like, I'm definitely winning, and there are 2 Bloodbound left. Maybe you just leave them.
I should have actually, because I did leave you with 1 in our second game.
But you knew I wasn't playing with that card because it was in the optional set. But like, nonetheless, right?
Yeah, that's true.
But you're right. That feels fair at the moment. Like, I think you're also right to bring up that this does feel like and it sort of goes without saying, like, we've basically said nothing but good things about Shadespire. And actually, to be honest, I don't think I have any bad things to say about it yet. But that's because this is a very generous and confident release. And that was an amazing attempt at quietly opening a beer. But
there's no way of doing it.
You passed me a beer.
Of course. There's no way of doing it quietly.
This is like, and I hope the game will only go from, I feel like any game like this, it should take a while before problems emerge. Ideally, they won't. Maybe that's an interesting thing to talk about, because some things that really interested me about Shadespire from a design point of view is that, so they've released this core set, and as we've said, it comes with 2 full armies or 2 full, sides, and optional cards for both of those sides, so you can do a pretty substantial bit of your own kind of deck wrangling. They are imminently about to release the Death Rattle, the Sepulchral Guard, who are the Death faction, who are a skeleton in a very, very good cape. And a lot of rubbish skeletons. And they have
that cape.
They have a lot of, ability to bring things back. They're also about to release the Auric Warband, the Iron Jaws, the kind of big chunky orcs that go and beat people up. And each of those expansion sets will come with all of the models for that faction, obviously, all of the cards specific to that faction, and I think a set of cards that are generic. Although I don't know how much overlap there is between the generic cards in those sets and what's in the core set.
Yeah.
Like, for example, one of the generic upgrades in the core set is like +1 damage, and the picture on that card is an orc. So I assume that there's some, like...
They'll definitely come with, they should come with, the objective cards for that faction as well. Like,
yeah. And I guess what I'm saying is I don't know how much, I don't know if you'll be in a situation where it's like, oh man, there's an upgrade card in the Iron Jaws set that is perfect for my Bloodbound.
Which is the X-Wing thing, right?
Yes, which is the X-Wing thing where you're buying the expansion for one card. Until those expansions are out, I don't know if that's the kind of game this is going to be.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like it at the moment, but so this is almost like the glass half empty side of it. It's like trying to figure out what is the vector by which that kind of jank enters the game.
Yeah. Right?
Particularly because, as you've said, there's no list building element in terms of the models. It's not like they are going to bring out a new Stormcast warband. We talk through what the other warbands are going to be, but it's not going to be like, the Liberator warband was perfect until they gave you the ability to swap out Severin for terrible
Hammerhand on his Dracoth.
Yeah, exactly. Terrible Nigel, I was going to say.
Terrible Nigel.
Overpowered Nigel, right? Like no one wanted him.
OP Nigel.
That's, you know what I mean? Because each of these little factions are like a designed set of characters intended to work together with different decks surrounding them. That for me limits at least one of the ways things can become broken, which is when you just release a new character that just slots in. So, and that's really interesting to me because designing the game in this way limits Games Workshop's ability to sell new stuff, right? Like, if you love Stormcast, and you have, maybe more specifically, if you love, because there is going to be another Stormcast warband, but if you love, skeletons, and more power to you, and you don't want to play anything else, and you have the core set and the skeleton set, I don't see why you would need anything else.
Yeah.
Really? Like, maybe there's a card in another set that pushes your efficiency by a few %, but if you don't draw it and you don't make use of it, then it's not going to be that big a deal breaker, right? So my question is almost like, how are they going to upsell you something else, Yeah. And maybe they don't feel like they need to.
It's a really good question because these are supposed to be like the living card game thing, right? This idea that they just go on and on and on, and they might occasionally need a reset, but then they are designed to go on and on. But I mean, maybe Shadespire isn't that. Maybe they'll just add more and more warbands, and that's eventually it will become bloated, but after a much longer period than if you do these kind of entwining kind of card releases. This is exciting to me because I think there's a trade-off in this kind of game design. Obviously, if you're talking about a collectible card game where you're relying on booster packs with random contents, that is the least player-friendly, maximally game maker, publisher-friendly model, right? Where players are spending a lot to get things they might not be certain that they want. The limited card game model, the Fantasy Flight kind of pioneered with things like Netrunner, is pretty player-friendly, or X-Wing as well, because as long as you buy the upgrades, buy the new packs as they come out, you'll have everything that exists in the game. And maybe sometimes you've got to buy multiples or something to kind of get an optimal competitive deck. But, it's transparent what you're going to buy. Right.
You get what
you know what you're going to get.
Yeah, you know what you're going to get. This is actually closer to a board game where all the parts are included than even an LCG would be, I think. A lot depends on what's in those other packs. Like, if there's an upgrade card in the Orc pack, which is just amazing for Bloodbound, but a bit shit for Orcs, then they have entered the LCG territory.
Yeah.
At the moment, though, I can't really, now that I've looked through the cards and have a sense of what they include, I really can't see that happening without it being kind of obvious and egregious if that's what they're doing. So I'm not going to commit to saying, oh wow, this approach is perfect yet. But it seems far more consumer friendly than you'd expect even. Because it means that, you're not at the moment being asked to buy anything other than the core set and the faction you want. And if the faction you want is in the core set, you're probably good for now. That's really interesting because, like I say, I've played plenty of Fantasy Flight games that have this model-ish, and they're not quite that generous with kind of just giving players enough to play competitively straight off the bat. So that's really exciting to me, I think.
Yeah, I think that it seems clear from what they've said so far that the first wave of releases, at least, are going to be self-contained new warbands. There's no sign of like swapping. This is something they could do. They could say, here's a Severin swap for the leader of your Stormcast. Here's a new type of hero.
Yeah.
Eventually they could do that. But at the moment, from what they've teased on both one community site and in the Shadespire rulebook, they've basically just outlined factions that are coming up, and we expect those to be self-contained boxes.
Yeah. So one thing that's in the game rules is that when you can pick a terrain tile from any tile in your collection, and pointedly, the only terrain tiles that exist at the moment are the ones that are in the core set. Like these individual new boxes don't come with, like, it's not like a skeleton specific terrain zone that you can get with skeletons, right? So that suggests to me that they will eventually release bigger packs. And that could be something like a rotating core set. Like every year or so, there's a new core set that has new boards in it and new factions. But again, and I fully anticipate the conversation 2 years from now where we're talking about, oh man, wasn't this wave of expansions great, but this wave kind of, blew a little bit. I can totally see that happen. Like that's possible with any game like this. But this is a very strong start for me. This is a very strong trust building start, which is what it's intended to do. And God knows any company can squander that trust. But this is a very confident, I think, player-minded way of beginning the game, where you're not being upsold minute one, which a lot of other games don't get to, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can buy this and know that you've got everything you need to play straight away without being, we should talk about the models actually, but you basically probably just need the core set and a pair of clippers if you don't have the pair of clippers, and you're done.
They are when they say push fit, they really are. Like we
should talk about this. Like, we went and bought the Burning Prosperous set in October last year, almost a year ago.
Yes.
And 3 months later, we'd finished painting it, we played it, right? Today, we went back to, we came back with the core set of Shadespire, sat and sort of split the workload of assembling the models, and 10 minutes later had fully assembled the models. So this is another thing. If you're not, maybe we should have said this at the top of the pod, but if you're not a model painter, it's pretty easy. So as long as you have a pair of clippers to take stuff off the sprues, and I think that is necessary because anything else is going to be annoying. You could do it with a hobby knife, but
not ideal.
Not ideal. All of the models are on colored plastic. So the Stormcaster in blue and the corner in red, which means they look like perfectly usable game pieces, even if you don't paint them. And they're also completely push fit, which means that, there is no glue required. There are a few fiddly joins, but actually most of them, which are like most of the Bloodbound are just like two halves of a man, and you plug them into the base and you're done.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, genuinely, and the models are great as well. We should talk about how good the models are.
They are fantastic. And part of the draw for me of, being very willing to spend money on expansions is because I think they're going to be like 20 quid, they've said.
Right. That's about right.
I think.
I was going to guess 15 to 20 quid based on the price of the core set.
Yeah. And I don't know where I got that from, so, pinch of salt there. But if it's like 20 quid for 7 Skelly models, that's pretty much on point for GW stuff, with some cards in the pack.
Yeah, the core set is 40 quid for obviously the game and 8 models. So 20 quid is not a bad guess for an expansion. I would say 15 to 20 quid would be where I think it would end up.
And yes, they're very easy to assemble. And it's very easy to get the whole game going very quickly. And the boards are really nice. They fold up, so they're designed to be portable and to fit into like carry cases and stuff like that. It's obviously designed to be a thing that you put in like a little box and you take around to your friend's house, or you take it off to a tournament and it's
like extra.
It's there, move into that space. And I'm excited.
Yeah, well, we both got an over experience with it. Like this, I guess this has become a kind of review, but like I was excited about it and I'm impressed with it and excited about what comes next for it, because, I don't know if it's a very tight, well-designed game, and that's something that I don't know if GW have always been known for. Question mark? The jank has always been an issue, right? Like, and it feels remarkably jank-free. And I think we're both aware that this maybe is the golden age for Shadespire, right now.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, very impressed. And actually, it really is a kind of perfect entry point. And that makes me think. So at the bottom of the Shadespire box, after you've gotten through the models and the assembly instructions and everything else, there's a little, like, fold-out leaflet. And it has a picture of Shadespire, the city, this glittering kind of glass city that's suspended between the realms of light and shadow. And then it says, this is just the beginning. And then you open it, and in the centerfold spread is a huge new AOS logo. Apparently they redesigned the AOS logo when no one was looking, saying, Warhammer Age of Sigmar, the war continues, or something like that. And a brilliant photo of like a beautifully painted Stormcast army clashing into a beautifully painted Khorne Bloodbound army, which is obviously deliberate, right? You've gotten Shadespire and it's your way into Warhammer, and you like these gold people and these angry men. And now, oh wow, there's a much bigger game you can play with this. And then that's the advert for the AOS starter kit. And my hope is that the benefit for GW for having a fairer pricing model for Shadespire is that it will turn people into AOS players. And that's not to say that AOS is going to steal all your money, although it might. God knows. It will happily steal your money. Like, we're both in that position of just, like, sure, have it. But I think a lot about how game creators make money from their products and what behaviors that encourages in them. And it's actually a relief to know that Games Workshop have an avenue for making money from Shadespire fans that potentially leaves Shadespire itself alone.
Right.
FFG with X-Wing don't have a way of making money for X-Wing players that isn't selling models or packs or event tickets to X-Wing players. And all of those things have room to create problems for the game in its structure and what the experience is of playing. If all Shadespire is intended to be is a kind of tight and self-contained gateway drug for AOS, perfect. If all it is designed to do is get people into the Games Workshop ecosystem, that's amazing for the potential creative future and the competitive future of that game, because it means that they don't have to put out an expansion that everyone feels like they have to buy because the great new upgrade card is in it. It just means that the game can be self-contained. And if it remains competitively healthy and diverse and interesting and fairly priced, for its lifespan, then it will probably continue to do the job of turning people into Age of Sigmar fans. Because, you'll get people who wouldn't consider a game like this, and they'll appreciate the fact that it's remained balanced for a long time, and then they'll go and buy a few extra models, and then suddenly they're playing 3,000 point games with AOS. It's almost like there's a safety valve provided by the other game for Shadespire's internal health. Yeah. Which is a really interesting thing.
That is interesting, isn't it? It reminds me, I often wonder what Blood Bowl's model is, and I think the model is Forge World. In the sense that a lot of the kind of special characters you can slot into your teams are Forge World models that, expensive but beautifully crafted and all of that. And that's feels like the premium elements that they must be kind of making money off that.
Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons that GW haven't put so much support behind Blood Bowl. They do support it, but they don't
it ticks along, right?
It ticks along. And that's because Blood Bowl isn't in a position to say, hey, take those models, go play this other game. Whereas they are going to release War Scrolls for Age of Sigmar for the Shadespire Warbands.
Yeah. Which is really awesome.
Which means that and again, it's that thing of I'm sitting on this little unit of Stormcast. These could be amazing unit champion models for my next squad of Liberators.
Yep.
You're inevitably going to use them. Right?
For sure. Unless their War Scroll as a group is so amazing that they, even if I'm not using them as those heroes, I will sub them into my Lib units just to make them look awesome. Yeah.
And that's genuinely heartening. I want to talk on the next episode of Miniatures Monthly about why I think these exact systems can fail for a game, because I feel like they have failed to X-Wing. And I love that game in principle, but I am at the end of my time with it, I think, because I think through, honestly, mismanagement. And also because of the ways that a game is encouraged to grow over time, simply by the pressures of its business model.
Right.
And it means a lot as a potential fan of Shadespire, someone who's tentatively willing to go, do I want to go to events for this game? To feel like I understand the ways that GW can benefit from my investment in it without that leading them in a direction that could ultimately hurt my investment in it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense.
Right. I don't want to, by spending money on it, I don't want to incentivize them to do things that hurt the game. And I don't feel like that's been successfully negotiated with X-Wing, and I feel like there's a better space for that here, because if the purpose of Shadespire is to turn people into mad Age of Sigmar collectors that get everything, then I'm like fucking Ozymandias in Watchmen. I already did that. I'm safe.
That's right.
You can't hurt me. I've already committed.
I did it 12 months ago.
Exactly. What we should do, and maybe to get off the business horse, the dry old business horse, which is not a character in Age of Sigmar yet, but might be, is talk about the fiction side of it and I guess the warbands that are coming, because both are quite exciting to me.
Yes, agreed. So the fiction side of things, Shadespire is in the realm of Nagash. It used to be a great city, full of, people who were great artists, great masters of technology, and they had invented this stuff called shade glass.
Yes.
And it had the capacity to contain and protect souls or soul energy in some way. And if we know anything about Nagash, that he's not happy at all about anyone else messing with the soul economy as he sees it.
Yeah.
So here were some, mortals, very advanced mortals, coming up with, ways of undermining his entire business.
Yeah. Staving off death, basically.
Staving off death, by, storing their consciousnesses and their hopes and dreams in this shade glass. And of course, Nagash, he can throw a real tantrum when these things happen.
He can have a skeleton hissy.
Which is exactly what happened. Yeah. And he destroyed the city and has brought it low. And where is it now? Is it between realms?
It's suspended between the realms of light and shadow,
right,
which is interesting from a Age of Sigmar lore perspective. The realms of light and shadow are the two that have been
not seen yet. Right?
Yeah, this is Hish and Ulgu.
Okay,
which are the ones that none of the kind of agents of the story so far have entered. So Sigmar has sent Stormcast to those realms, but they've not come back.
Right.
And, and what Chaos is doing there is unknown. There's a lot of theorizing that, like, when they finally do the big, revival of the High Elves and Dark Elves, that's going to be where they are.
Yes.
But, I mean, Dark Elves are kind of still are in it at the moment-ish, and both are kind of ish at the moment, but ish in Hish.
Yeah. So maybe Severin Steelheart's like they are one of those lost roving bands who just found themselves in Shadespire between these realms.
And so Shadespire itself is sort of trapped in this position, detached from death and trapped between light and shadow, and there's all these references to mirrors and things. And that's one of the reasons that's used to explain why the players assemble the battlefield, because you have these strange shifting passageways, mirrored battlefields in some cases, that kind of thing. Also, death isn't permanent, because the entire place is kind of ensconced in this kind of shade glass magic now. So if people die, they just come back. They just come back somewhere else. Like death is impermanent. All of that stuff is impermanent. So these warbands that are all trapped in Shadespire are constantly fighting each other and dying and coming back, which is a nice kind of fictional hook to hang the competitive nature of the game off, right?
Yeah. And it's almost like Nagash exiled the place, is that he just didn't want that technology even in, accessible to anyone. Obviously it is to these warbands. But the interesting connotations for the Stormcast, who are endlessly reforged by Sigmar, and each time they come back, they come back a bit wrong until they end up being almost like zombies, is that shade glass can potentially protect them from the ravages of reforging.
Right.
So the idea is that you could use shade glass to protect elements of your personality and elements of your memories and things like that, so that the reforging process doesn't slowly destroy you from the inside out.
But also the flip side to that is that in this particular place, the Stormcast that die aren't getting reforged. Their death is getting cancelled, if you know what I mean.
Yes,
so
it's different for them.
if I beat up one of your Stormcast in Shadespire, they're not getting blasted back to Azir to be reforged by Sigmar. That's just, they're trapped in a cycle beyond the reforging cycle in this specific place.
Which kind of means, which helps them to hang on to their identities, which is why they're all named and they all have their own personalities still. So Severin Steelheart is always going to be Severin Steelheart in that little realm. Yeah. But it's a cool reason for the Stormcast to be there, and it's a cool little hook for people who are into Stormcast, and, the idea that they'll be trying to help their own situation, and,
Yeah. The interesting thing about this as well is that, so Games Workshop have been building towards this for a while, and I quite like the way they tell these stories across multiple game supplements. So the sort of ruined outskirts of Shadespire, not the part of the city that's been sort of existentially plucked from reality and is now suspended somewhere else, but it's sort of material ruins in the realm of death are the setting for the Skirmish campaign, the Skirmish supplement that came out last year, where you're looking for shade glass. Also, this leads into what is heavily rumored is coming next, which is related to the Herald of Death model that came out. But also some sort of novel stuff that was announced last week, which is that, next year's big Age of Sigmar conflict is Nagash versus Sigmar.
Yeah. Awesome.
And that's because basically Nagash has had it up to his little skeleton chin with people interfering in the Souls economy. And so he's going to finally kick back against the Stormcast, and that's being set up at the moment by Shadespire, where, you know, this is just a little illustration of the consequences of Nagash's anger. Whereas that's going to be felt much more broadly across the game, the bigger game, next year, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I'm super excited about that, because partly because I want to collect a Death Army, and also because I want to fight some skellies with my Stormcast. So it's perfect.
I just want to set skeletons on fire.
Yeah, well, they're very good at being on fire.
Yeah, and
no problem at all.
We should also talk about, so in the manual for the game, which I'm holding right now, there is a full list of the warriors of Shadespire, which is the factions both in the core set, but also unannounced or only teased. We've talked about some of this before in the Miniatures Monthly news section, but there is stuff in here that we didn't know, so I thought it might be worth just running through it, because it's kind of interesting to think about.
Yeah, definitely.
It's not, it's lore for each of these factions, so we're not really necessarily getting, like how they're going to play, but we could intuit some things.
We sure can.
So what this confirms is that, while Steelheart's Champions is the Stormcast Liberator, warband included in the core set, the game is also going to get the Fast Riders, who are explicitly, Vanguard Hunters, led by Hunter Prime Sanson Fast Rider.
Fire Strider?
Fast Rider.
Fast Rider?
He strides a
Fast
long
Rider.
way. Fast Rider. No, like, so if he was,
big steps or fast on a horse?
So, right, if he was very quick, it would be Fast Rider, because I'm gonna be momentarily Liverpudlian about that, and it's the shorter A, right?
Yeah.
Far, as in far away.
Gotcha.
Strider, as in walker.
goes
Not
on
Fast Rider.
Yes.
Fast Rider. Okay.
No horses or griff beasts.
No, but there is an Etherwing in the art.
Well,
so that suggests that they're going to have a bird friend.
I love the birds. They're terrible in Age of Sigmar, but the idea of having one in Shadespire would be hilarious.
And apparently I think the idea is that they were part of the expedition into Shadespire along with the other Stormcast warband.
Right.
But they got separated.
Okay.
So Vanguard Hunters are the lighter, more lightly armed Stormcast that have ranged weapons. So that'd be interesting to see if there's more of a skirmishy kind of Stormcast playstyle in there as well.
Yeah, maybe with a few more models. The weird thing about them is that they're supposed to be lightly armored, but they're actually bigger than my Liberators. Like the actual models are bigger and more imposing. But yes, that's their fancy, is that they are rangers basically.
Yeah.
Rather than warriors.
And it'd be nice to have a kind of, and this is interesting because at least what we'll talk about, but to have like a variant Stormcast playstyle, maybe with an extra model, or maybe it'll be like 3 of them and a bird or something that.
Yeah. And they might have, ranged attacks, which so far, like ranged strikes are actually very limited in the core set. So it might be like, that might be their thing.
That's interesting as well from a design point of view. At the moment, there's no magic and no like bows. Both of those things could change the game.
Yes.
Which would be interesting.
Yeah.
Then, the champions of Khorne include Garrick's Reavers, who are the blood-bound Blood Reavers from the core set, but also Magor's Fiends, who are Blood Warriors. So Blood Warriors, if you're not familiar with the way Khorne's massive list of nouns works, are the more heavily armored, more elite, servants of Khorne. So Blood Reavers are the hordes of shite men that run ahead and die.
The chumps.
The chumps. And, Blood Warriors are the better armed and equipped and trained fighters. So this suggests a more elite version of a Khorne force to go along. What I'm really interested in is if the upgrades and things for each of these forces are transferable between the two of them.
Yes.
If there are like, cause at the moment, like the symbol for the, Blood Reavers is like a Khorne symbol. So if that, is applicable to both, then that's really interesting. Cause then some of those Blood Reaver, upgrades maybe are more interesting on a more elite character.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I love the Blood Warrior models. Like when I do a little Khorne spin-off force for AOS, I wanted to do mostly them. So I'm kind of excited about that.
Yeah, that's right.
Next we have one of the ones that's coming out very soon, Iron Skulls boys, who are the Iron Jaws, Orc Warriors. That's a warband of 4 quite heavily armored Orc Warriors that are, fast and very deadly. so it exists like somewhere between the sort of Stormcast and the Bloodband, actually. Like they're in that middle ground.
Yeah. Interesting bunch and devotedly close combat.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I want to see what their rules are, but I
Yeah.
am actually like, it's interesting that we're both curious there's 2 expansions coming out, including the Sepulchral Guard. We're both interested in the opposite ones, which is nice. So if you end up with the core set and the skeletons, I might end up with the core set and the orcs, which would be a kind of...
That'd be really cool.
Yeah. Next we have one of the other unannounced ones, which are the Chosen Axes, which is a band of fire slayers. So, nudie little fire dwarves.
Probably quite a few of them as well in the new.
I think so. Like, so they've redesigned fire slayers as kind of a horde army in AOS, but not necessarily the case in... It'd be interesting to see, because they are supposed to be elite fighters as well.
They're led by a Runefather, aren't they, by the artwork? Perhaps.
Yes, so they're led by the legendary Runefather, Fjulgrimnir, which is a good name to have if you are a fire slayer. And it's about, they're on a quest for honor, as dwarves ever are. So, yeah, that suggests a very elite leader. I don't know, I genuinely don't know how they're going to do fire slayers although I'm going to they're going to have either objectives or inherent abilities that trigger off taking damage. I'm just going to...
Let's throw that out there.
Yeah. Because that's kind of how they tend to work. They get
all the time.
Yeah. They get very cross.
The old berserkers, yep.
Then we have the Sepulchral Guard.
Yay.
I know you're excited about, which is, a band of skeletons seeking Nagash's kind of blessing, basically. And they are led by the Sepulchral Warden. I just like saying Warhammer words, I think. And their band includes the Prince of Dust.
Excellent. Their big thing is that there's loads of them, 7, I think.
Yes.
And they can come back as often as you want, pretty much, if you've got the Warden on the field. But of course, every time they are struck down, you're giving your opponent a glory point. So they're supposed to be quite a difficult warband to play, because it's when do you actually sacrifice your dudes and when do you bring them back? And of course, when they die and come back, that's what inspires them. So that inspired state we were talking about earlier that the the Blood Reavers go into when 3 of them die, when your Stormcast take a shield hit, for the Death faction, they come back from the dead inspired. They love it.
Yeah. And that's exciting for Khorne as well, because Khorne loves it when things die.
Yeah, what the hell is going to fight between those two forces?
But I love the idea, like, so if a Khorne warband, because like there's literally like, the skull harvest begins. It's like there's skulls everywhere. They won't stop coming out of the ground.
Yeah.
But like, can they keep claiming the skulls from the same skeleton as it keeps coming back? Do you get a different skull?
It's interesting, isn't it?
Is it like the skeletons in Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, where they just go find a different skull?
I think that's what happens.
Yeah.
It must do, because you get a glory point for each one, right?
Exactly.
There's a brilliant rule
it's like supermarket sweep for Khorne.
There's too many skulls. There's a good rule for the Sepulchral Guard. I think it might be a card or something, but if a couple of them are dead, they count as assisting. For your guys in combat, so as though their arms like coming out of the ground to actually give you those extra assists and to improve your dice rolls.
Yeah, that's a ploy. I think that's a ploy for them, where it's like for the next activation, your dead guys are just there in the ground helping.
I absolutely love the models, which is what makes me like them, but also they sound like very difficult and interesting.
Yeah, both that warband and the one that I'm about to mention have the benefit of being new models for factions that haven't been touched for a long time, and it's just really cool seeing them back.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Like, I mean, the Sepulchral Warden, who's the skeleton with the amazing cloak, is literally like, he's the I know we talk about it a lot, but he is the fanciest fucking skeleton
He's
they've
delighted
ever done.
to be there as well.
It's like,
so
what
happy.
up, motherfuckers, with skeletons?
We got this. Is that realm?
It's exciting. So the next one and the final one in the book is the one that I'm most excited about, which is Spiteclaw's Swarm, who are the Skaven.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about New Skaven.
New Skaven models.
Helps that I just finished a 30-hour Skaven campaign in Total War Warhammer 2, but also just ready for them to be New Skaven. And also, I love the idea that they are basically just trying to loot the place and get out.
Oh yeah.
Because Skaven are the only faction that can get between realms without help of a realm gate. So they're not trapped.
Their ratways are rather than being beneath the old world, beneath the old empire cities, they are warrens that tie the realms together, and like they've infested all of reality with that.
And also I hope, and I think it's probably reliable to assume, that Skaven will be the kind of warband I'm interested in, which is also the reason I like the Khorne warband, where it's a mixture of disposable grunts and quite scary elites. And that's kind of what I want them to do with Skaven.
Yeah,
like, I want the assassins or the storm vermin or something who are kind of there at the top that you protect, and the clan rats that are disposable, with that kind of strategic option for them to run off, scurry off and find objectives. And
Yeah,
things.
nice. I really, really want the character with, claws. With, obviously they all got claws because they're rats, but,
like Wolverine claws.
like Wolverine claws, which were a big part of, Mordheim.
Yeah.
They would help them climb.
It's totally because I had a Skaven warband in Mordheim. That's why I'm so excited
So
about
it's a good
these.
enough reason for me.
Like
they should be there. They should be in the mix, right?
Yeah.
If wherever there's a kind of breakdown, an old city full of treasure, Skaven have got to be there with their weird claws.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. Like, so that's all the stuff that they've announced. And obviously there's going to be more stuff to come. The other thing that's worth stressing, we obviously refer to the game as Shadespire. But the game refers to itself as Warhammer Underworlds Shadespire.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Which is, so this, my other prediction for the future is that Underworlds is the kind of actual name of this game.
Right.
Like, there's a sort of generic symbol for the game, which is used for things like deployment zones and things in the game, which is referred to as the Underworlds symbol. So we're going to call it Shadespire forever, but I suspect they would like you to call it Underworlds. And I would not be surprised if they do a rotating core set, that the next one isn't in Shadespire.
Yeah.
If it's like Warhammer Underworlds Skavenblight, or Warhammer Underworlds, where the Dark Elves now.
Yeah. That's completely.
It'll presumably be an underworld of some kind.
Yeah.
But like that, I think is completely believable.
That's very good. That'd be a cool way for things to go, I think.
Yeah. That's exciting. Yeah. So long story short, I think we're both pretty excited about Shadespire.
Great so far. Can't wait to play more of it. It's
Yeah.
really awesome.
Do you want to play a game now?
Let's do it.
All right. Join us hopefully next week. Well, definitely next week, for regular Miniatures Monthly. It's a good time to get your questions in to miniatures@crateandcrowbar.com if you fancy doing that. Sending us a question for the next episode. Tom, I know people have new ways to find you on the social media now. How do you do that?
Finally restarted my Instagram account for miniatures painting stuff, and it's called Ludo Paints Minis, which Ludo Paints MINIS, the words.
Yes.
Ludo Paints Minis on Instagram.
Link in the show notes. My minis Instagram can be found at instagram.com/exitwarp. I'm on Twitter at @CThurston. That's CTHURSTEN. Tom, you're on Twitter at
PCG Ludo LUDO.
And we are collectively on Twitter for Minis Monthly at Minis Monthly.
Yes.
It's very self-explanatory. So, hope you enjoyed this
Bonus pod.
Catch you next time for more talking about Warhammer.
Woo!
Hooray! Bye.
Bye.